It had been the kind of slow morning that reminded me why I had built the lake cabin in the first place. The mist rolled in soft over Lake Miller, dew sparkled across the pine needles, and the silence was untouched by traffic or obligation. I had just finished chopping some wood for the outdoor fire pit when my phone rang with that unknown number from the county recorder's office. The voice on the other end was polite but clearly nervous, as if they already knew something was wrong but were trying not to show their hand too early. "Mr. Brenner, I'm calling to confirm that you submitted a property deed transfer request for parcel 114 CLK72. I remember pausing with my axe still gripped mid-handle, heart suddenly not beating the same. "No," I said slowly. "I didn't submit anything. Why?" That was when the clerk, her voice now even more cautious, said that the documents had already cleared initial verification, but were under a secondary review because a notary seal looked off. Then she added the kicker, "The buyer is listed as Gregory Witherspoon." The name hit me like a slap. Greg Witherspoon, husband of Karen Witherspoon, HOA tyrant, neighborhood menace. The woman who once fined a 72-year-old widow for having non-regulation flower colors in her garden. The same woman who spent her days circling the neighborhood in a golf cart, carrying her binder of violations like it was a sacred text. And now she had escalated from garden policing to outright fraud? For a moment, I stood there in disbelief, the familiar coolness of the lake breeze brushing my face, while something much darker coiled in my chest. By the time I reached my lawyer, Victor, I was running on adrenaline and decades of landowner pride. He didn't need convincing. As soon as I laid out the details, he sprang into action. He had represented me through a dozen real estate developments and knew my portfolio better than I did. While he contacted the necessary offices to flag the fraudulent deed, I went straight to the county courthouse with a certified copy of the original title in hand. I'd kept every document associated with this cabin laminated and locked in a fireproof safe for a reason. And now, that paranoia was paying off. Back at the cabin that evening, I had just sat down with a beer when I saw the black Mercedes pulling up my drive. It was unmistakable. Sleek, polished, and way too dramatic for a woman coming to declare property rights. Karen stepped out dressed like she was about to star in a courtroom drama blazer, blouse, heels, and her signature cutboard clutched like it held the 10 Commandments. Her face carried that smug half-smile I had seen countless times at HOA meetings, where she'd bullied veterans, single mothers, and long-time residents into repainting their mailboxes or tearing down garden fences. Without even knocking, she marched up the steps and planted herself in front of me. "You're trespassing, Mr. Brenner," she said with theatrical gravity. "This property has been legally transferred." I didn't flinch. "Karen, I built this cabin before your HOA even existed. You forged my signature, and you're committing felony fraud." She waved the document in my face. "We processed the sale through official channels. The county stamp is on it. You lost. This is now Greg's property." Her tone wasn't just Smuggart was victorious, as if she had spent years fantasizing about this moment. As if seizing this cabin would somehow cement her legacy in HOA law. I took out my phone and began recording. "Say that again. Just for the record." She didn't even hesitate. The HOA approved the purchase. "Greg owns this land now, and you'll be removed by law enforcement if you don't vacate." That's when we heard the faint wail of sirens growing louder from the forest road. Karen's smugness turned to glee. She had really done it. She had called the police on the real owner of the land. 3 cruisers pulled up, tires skidding against gravel as they flanked the driveway. Out stepped Sheriff Donnelly, a tall, calm man with decades of law under his belt and zero patience for HOA theatrics.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Decades of law under his belt and zero patience for HOA theatrics. He took one look at me, then Karen, and asked, "What exactly is going on here?" Karen launched into a breathless monologue about legal transactions, hostile occupancy, and how I was threatening the HOA's structure. Donnelly listened quietly, then turned to me. "You got your paperwork?" I handed over a folder with the original deed, legal exemptions, and Victor's signed complaint. Donnelly flipped through it, then took out his radio and muttered something low. After a tense moment, he looked back up. "This deed Karen submitted is under fraud investigation by the state. Until that's resolved, Mr. Brenner remains the sole legal owner." Karen's mouth opened but no words came out. She turned red, then white. "That's impossible. We have rights." "No," Donnelly said evenly. "You have a big problem." By that evening, Victor had secured a temporary injunction and had already filed an emergency asset freeze with the state court. Given the clear evidence of fraud, it was a textbook case of financial abuse. And since Karen had tied multiple HOA financial accounts into her personal trust to streamline the budgeting process, everything she owned was now subject to investigation. Her house, her SUV, her savings, all locked up in a matter of hours. I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. Once word got out, other neighbors started coming forward. Victor and I held an informal meeting at the community center where we listened to stories that made my blood boil. One couple had been fined for hanging Christmas lights out of season. Another woman revealed that Karen once tried to evict her over a barbecue pit. The HOA had turned into a dictatorship under Karen, and her fake deed was just the final straw. The most heartbreaking story came from a retired Army colonel who lived 3 cabins down from mine. His wife had passed recently, and Karen cited him for yard disorder because he hadn't mowed his lawn within 48 hours of her notice. He broke down crying during the meeting. She made me feel like a criminal in my own home. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had built a kingdom of fear, and now it was time to burn it to the ground with facts, with law, and with the truth. Victor took the testimonies, documented everything, and drafted a class action lawsuit. Within a week, 27 residents signed on. We accused Karen of abuse of authority, fraudulent financial handling, falsified fines, illegal use of HOA funds, and real estate fraud. Karen, in response, hired a defense attorney who tried to flip the narrative. She claimed I was a disgruntled neighbor trying to weaponize a personal vendetta. But the evidence didn't lie. The digital forensics team retrieved metadata proving that the forged deed was submitted from Karen's home IP address. The notary seal used? It belonged to a deceased notary who hadn't worked in 5 years. Her signatures didn't match prior filings, and the fake purchase agreement was laughably amateur-wrong lot size, no witness, and a fake county stamp that used an outdated seal design. By the 3rd week, the state's fraud division had built a case so strong that Karen was formally charged. When she was served with court papers, she screamed in front of 2 news cameras that I was orchestrating a smear campaign. That footage became a meme overnight. Someone dubbed it over with opera music. HOA Karen's final area. But what satisfied me most was the complete and total collapse of her illusion. She had bullied dozens, stolen thousands in fines, and tried to steal my home. But now, every bank account she had touched was under lock and key. Her husband Greg, once smug and silent, had vanished from public view. Rumor had it his law license was being reviewed because he had signed off on the fake deed himself. And me? I still had my cabin. I still had my name on the deed. And I had something more, now an army of neighbors who finally stood up, not just for me, but for each other. The court hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning, but by 7:30 a.m., the parking lot was full. Residents from across the Clearwater Bluffs neighborhood gathered like it was a town hall revival. Some came with folders of evidence. Others came with coffee and lawn chairs, eager to see the downfall of a tyrant who had ruled over them for far too long. At the center of it all stood the courthouse, a beige brick building with a green copper roof and an American flag fluttering from the front lawn. I arrived with Victor, my lawyer, who was reviewing the final version of our deposition while sipping black coffee. "Today," he said with calm certainty, "we bury the HOA dragon." Karen pulled up 20 minutes later in a rental car. Her prized Mercedes had been repossessed just a few days earlier, after the asset freeze was fully enforced. She stepped out of the car dressed more humbly than I had ever seen her, gone with the tailored blazers, pearls, and designer handbags. Instead, she wore a muted grey suit that looked off the rack, and her expression lacked the smug superiority she used to wear like armour. Her husband, Greg, wasn't with her. Rumours had swirled that he had taken off to avoid testifying under subpoena. Whether it was cowardice or strategy, I didn't care. He was part of this too, and eventually, the law would catch up to him. Inside the courtroom, Judge Evelyn Monroe took her seat behind the bench. She was the kind of judge who didn't tolerate grandstanding or theatrics, and her reputation for swift, logical decisions made her the perfect person to oversee this case. The room fell silent as the first witness was called. One by one, neighbours testified to the abuses they endured under Karen's rule-unjust fines, invasive inspections, retaliatory HOA decisions. One elderly woman sobbed as she described being fined for a single dandelion sprouting in her front yard. Another showed emails where Karen threatened to place a lien on their property if they didn't repaint their mailbox by Friday. When my turn came, I walked to the stand with the original deed in hand. "This is the cabin my father and I built, brick by brick, beam by beam. I have owned it, improved it, and lived in it since 2007. I held up the forged deed, then flipped to the notary seal. This notary died 5 years before this document was created. The signature is fake. The buyer, Greg Witherspoon, is Karen's husband. She tried to steal my home and legally gift it to her own family, using forged records and HOA manipulation. Karen didn't look at me. She didn't look at the jury, or the judge, or anyone else. She stared at her trembling hands, fidgeting in her lap, as the reality of her crumbling empire settled around her like dust after demolition. Victor...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Settled around her like dust after demolition. Victor then presented the digital forensics report. We had time-stamped IP logs, email records showing coordination between Karen and Greg, and a forensic analysis of every HOA document she had altered over the last 3 years. We presented financial records showing how HOA dues were siphoned into miscellaneous expenditures that funded personal trips, unauthorized board retreats, and even remodeling on Karen's home that was classified as clubhouse maintenance. One document showed a $14,000 payment to a landscaping firm that didn't exist. The check had been deposited into a joint account shared between Karen and Greg. Karen's defense attorney attempted to frame her as a victim of overzealous residents. He claimed she was doing her best to uphold neighborhood standards. But even the courtroom clerks rolled their eyes. The evidence was overwhelming, and Karen's silence spoke volumes. She never took the stand. Her lawyer rested their case with a half-hearted shrug. Judge Monroe didn't waste time. Her ruling was swift and precise. The court finds overwhelming evidence of forgery, financial fraud, abuse of authority, and malicious intent. Mrs. Witherspoon is hereby found guilty of willfully forging legal documents and engaging in a preparer scheme to defraud a property owner. The judge's gavel echoed through the chamber like thunder. Effective immediately, Mrs. Witherspoon is prohibited from participating in any HOA governance in the state. A full restitution of $712,000 is ordered to be paid to the Clearwater Bluffs neighborhood, and the title to parcel 114 CLK 72 is confirmed as belonging to Mr. Thomas Brenner, permanently. The entire courtroom erupted in gasps, followed by applause. Even the bailiff didn't try to stop it. Karen sat there frozen, pale and trembling, while Victor leaned over to me and whispered, "That's game." After the trial, we stepped outside into a swarm of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and I gave a short statement This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about justice, about standing up to power when it becomes corrupt. We didn't just fight for me, we fought for every neighbor who was ever threatened, bullied, or silenced. And we won. And we won. But the fallout didn't end there. The judgment triggered a chain reaction. Local media exploded with headlines about HOA corruption, prompting a full-scale audit of all nearby HOA organizations by the state. Other communities started reaching out to Victor for legal advice, many of them sharing eerily similar stories of small-time tyrants abusing bylaws to exert control. Victor started holding monthly HOA reform clinics, helping residents across the county rewrite their charters and ensure power couldn't be abused again. Back at Clearwater Bluffs, the neighborhood took on a new life. Without Karen patrolling the sidewalks or issuing threats, people started to relax. Yards became more colorful, kids played outside later into the evening, and neighborly bonds that had long frayed began to rebuild. One Saturday afternoon, we held a massive community cookout on the lakeshore. No one worried about noise ordinances or whether their grill met HOA standards. We ate ribs, told stories, and watched the sunset with music playing well into the night. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came weeks later when I received a handwritten letter from one of Karen's former allies on the board. It read, "I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too afraid to." It wasn't much, but it mattered. It proved that truth had finally pierced the fear that had held our community hostage. Karen was never seen again in Clearwater Bluffs. Her house was auctioned off.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Again in Clearwater Bluffs. Her house was auctioned off to repay her debts. The money she embezzled was recovered through civil claims. And Greg? He was disbarred quietly and moved to a one-bedroom condo 3 counties away. The mighty HOA empire they tried to build had turned to dust. As for me, I was offered permanent leadership over the newly restructured HOA, but I declined. I didn't want to rule anything. I just wanted peace. We installed a rotating resident council instead, voted on quarterly. Everyone had a voice, and for the first time in a long while, people felt heard. A year passed, and Clearwater Bluffs looked like a completely different place. Kids organized bike parades, families hosted potlucks, and holiday decorations that once would have triggered violation notices now lit up the streets with pride. We created a neighborhood tradition called Freedom Fridays, where every resident could celebrate however they wanted: grill, music, fire pits, or just quiet conversations under the stars. It wasn't just a celebration of fun, it was a reminder of what we had overcome. We even launched a small local newsletter titled The Lake Ledger. In its first issue, we included an anonymous editorial written by one of our elders titled When Silence Was Safer. It spoke of the fear that had lingered for years under Karen's rule, and how that silence had merely stolen more than property, it had almost stolen dignity. That issue sold out instantly, and subscriptions flooded in. Even nearby neighborhoods took notice. We received letters of admiration from other communities, thanking us for standing up and inspiring others to audit their HOAs. One family, displaced by another corrupt HOA, moved into Clearwater Bluffs and was greeted with a home-cooked meal by 10 different neighbors. That's the kind of place we had become. As for me, I started volunteering to help other neighborhoods draft better HOA structures. Victor and I wrote a public guidebook titled HOA Reclaimed, which was distributed online for free. It included stories, legal templates, and resources for anyone who felt powerless under a system gone rogue. I still live in my lake cabin. The water is just as blue, the air just as clean, and the porch swing creaks the same way it did the night I moved in. But something's changed, not just in me, but in the neighborhood. It's freer, lighter, no longer shackled by threats, rules, and power games. I keep both deeds, the real one and the forged one, framed side by side above the fireplace. A reminder of what was almost lost. and a warning of how far some people will go when they think they're above the law. But as long as people stand up, as long as neighbors unite, and as long as the truth is louder than fear, tyrants like Karen will always fall. That's not just justice. That's home.